entirety of what you know, what would you suggest the government does?
Well, there needs to be a continued investment in training and skills. They are doing so, but we see some shortcuts as far as we're concerned being made, like the micro qualification pathway. Well, that's great to get people started on the bottom rung of the qualification ladder, but there needs to be more intensive training, and we also need to train the trainers. Some of the people within the building industry that take on what in all intents and purposes are apprentices don't necessarily have the right skills to impart training and wisdom in the process. And many of the apprentices, the people in training that we speak to, consider that they're just treated like cheap labour. And so, that's a deterrent to people getting into the industry. Some apprentices are having a great time and are being mentored by extremely good builders who want to impart their knowledge and their craft. But sadly, as far as we're concerned, those people are few and far between, albeit I have to couch that in a manner which reflects that our engagement with the building industry really is around the rat bags that are doing wrong by consumers. But, we have a serious problem in terms of, the meeting the demand for housing, but most importantly, the quality of these houses, because we just do not want to see a repeat of what happened in the 90s and the early 2000s, where we built houses with defects which have destroyed people's lives.
Yeah, they have. Look, Mei Chen was talking earlier about how they have a bottom line in Singapore to get people into houses when we were talking about housing them. Just the equivalent of that in this area, if I just read one of these. Look at the German system, a 3-year apprenticeship, 1 week per month at a vocational college, tradesperson status after 3 years, then 3 years work, then 9 to 12 months at a technical college to become a master builder. These guys are proper master builders. Is the training just too rough and ready? Do we need actually to somehow institutionalise this sort of system?
Well, to a degree, but sadly, because we are so behind the drag curve, we have to balance, actually getting the number of skilled people into the workforce against, the more comprehensive training program. But there is a way around that in terms of, having a pipeline, designed to induct people into the program, give them some basic skills, get them on the job, and then have some targets in terms of ongoing professional development. And even down to basic business skills, because one of the really disturbing things we at Hobans are seeing is the multitude of failures of building companies in a boom time. How does it happen? And then on the other hand, one of the other solutions that we see, which hasn't really been leveraged well enough, is, factory manufactured homes, modular type homes. I know in some people's mind a modular home doesn't look all that nice, but there are some amazing modular designs.
Yeah, which we do hear about. John, I've got to leave it there.
Yeah, but those companies have gone bust too, Jim.
Yes.
It's just biggest belief.
Thank you, John Gray, on that cheerful note. John Gray, thanks, and on that cheerful note. The music swells. Mei Chen, always lovely to see you.
Nice to see you, Jim.
So you're glad the week's over, and so is Andrew, I think.
Oh, yes, very much.
So if the week's over for you, everybody, I hope you're glad as well and you have a lovely weekend. And if you're working through it, I hope you have a lovely weekend too. Thank you for your company this week on the panel. We're back on Monday and Checkpoint is on the way.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, the Prime Minister wants answers soon, and the Czech Republic says it's about to start the extradition of the convicted drug smuggler Carol Schrubeck from New Zealand. If a little petrol station in the middle of the North Island can charge $2.10 a litre for unleaded 91, why can't others? We're at the Gull at Aotea Muri, where the lowest prices in the country are attracting motorists from far and wide. Also tonight, revelations a pilot on board the doomed Lion airplane previous flight also made a distress call and had technical problems with the plane. A scientist slams ACT leader David Seymour's concerns about bacteria-laden killer reusable shopping bags.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The National Party is rejecting claims it could have deported the Czech drug smuggler Karel Srubeck while it was in power. Tuariki Delamere, who was the minister in the late 1990s, helped Srubeck gain residency in 2008. He says former national ministers Jonathan Coleman, Nathan Guy and Michael Woodhouse all failed to deport him when they could. But Mr Woodhouse says it never came across his or any other national minister's desk because Srubeck had been arrested on other crimes and couldn't be deported.
He created victims in New Zealand and they have a right for those charges to be prosecuted. It wasn't possible, and Immigration New Zealand have made this very clear, it wasn't possible to present a file to the Minister of the day until that process had completed. When it was, the Minister was Ian Lees-Galloway.
National MP Michael Woodhouse. The Czech Republic is soon to launch efforts to extradite Srubeck from New Zealand. Emergency doctors are calling for electric scooters users to wear helmets and ride slower after a spike of injuries in Auckland and Christchurch. The scooters only hit the streets of the two cities 3 weeks ago, but the Australasian College for Emergency Medicine says there have been as many as 3 injuries a day. John Bonning says they include broken collarbones and kneecaps, concussions and even a collapsed lung. Dr Bonning says the Lime Scooter Company, councils and the public all need to do their part to stop the increase of injuries.
The company needs to have a degree of responsibility in terms of warning people about use of helmets and the dangers of travelling at 25 kilometres an hour. Councils potentially need to be involved to regulate, but also clearly people need to take some personal responsibility as well.
Dr John Bonning. A leading melanoma expert has delivered a stark warning about a particularly dangerous form of the cancer. At a summit in Auckland today, John Kelly says nodular melanomas are often ignored because they look like persistent pimples or blood blisters. But Professor Kelly from the Victorian Melanoma Service in Melbourne says they are responsible for nearly half of fatalities, despite accounting for just 15% of melanomas.
Pimples will go away within a few weeks, but something that's still growing at a month, feels firm, is an important thing to draw to the attention of your doctor as soon as possible.
Dermatologist John Kelly. Meanwhile, new research presented to the Melanoma Summit today suggests melanoma rates are improving in younger generations due to raising awareness about the harm of too much sun. The Prime Minister says there'll be a fair amount of reflection among Labour members as they come together for the first time since the general election. The Labour Party's annual conference opens officially in Dunedin this evening. It marks just over a year since Labour formed a government with New Zealand First and the Greens. It's been 10 years since the party held a conference while in power. Jacinda Ardern says it's also her first chance to stand before the party membership as Prime Minister.
This is my first chance to stand in front of the Labour Party, having formed a government and spent a year in office. I didn't expect the last time I was in front of a Labour conference to be in the position that I'm in. So it will be a bit of a chance for reflection and really just to lay out some of the things that we want to tackle going forward as well.
Jacinda Ardern speaking to reporters in Dunedin. The Mayor of New Plymouth says his city should have access to an international quality stadium as options for the earthquake-prone Yarrow Stadium become clearer. The Taranaki Stadium Trust has revealed that a covered stadium costing up to $250 million is one of the options being proposed for Yarrow. But the Trust, which is a regional council entity, says it can only afford a basic fix to the existing stadium for less than $50 million. It says if the public wants a new stadium, other local authorities will have to contribute. The Mayor, Neil Holdham, says he's waiting for the Trust to present detailed costings and options so a quick and cost-effective solution can be found for the stadium. A whale that's rarely seen along the New Zealand coast has been stranded on a Waikato beach. Volunteer organisation Project Jonah says it received reports of the stranding of a southern bottlenose whale on Port Waikato Beach about 11 o'clock this morning. Its General Manager Darren Grover says southern bottlenose whales aren't normally found in shallow waters.
They dive incredibly deep, but as I say, they do live in those deeper offshore waters. But when one does come to shore, it's often because there's a high likelihood of some form of illness or potential injury or other reason that the animal might have come close to shore to waters that it's not familiar with.
Darren Grover says the stranded mammal is skinny and possibly still quite a young whale. Rescue efforts to refloat the whale will take place at high tide around 6 o'clock. Small parts of West and South Auckland are still without power after last night's strong winds cut electricity to thousands of homes. Vector says they're restoring power to a few streets in Kumeu and about 8 households in Clendon Park. It says crews worked throughout the night to get the power back on as quickly as possible. It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport. Former Silver Fern Temepara Bailey has announced she'll step out of retirement to play for the Northern Stars in the 2019 domestic netball season. The 43-year-old has served as the club's assistant coach for the past 2 years. She's been selected to take the place of veteran Grace Carter, who is withdrawing due to pregnancy. The 89 Test veteran last played domestically in 2014, and the Stars coach, Kitty Wills, says after only 5 wins this year, Bailey's top-tier experience is essential.
I need somebody out there who will marshal the troops. Bubby will push not only the tactics, but actually push those players so that they get to where they need to be and they're doing exactly what they need to be in order to execute our game plan. She's going to be an extension of the coaching team out onto the court.
Kitty Wills. Broncos halfback Cody Nikarima has rallied behind Sean Johnson after what he says was a harsh public announcement from the Warriors Rugby League Club. The Warriors have told the Kiwis playmaker to test his value on the open market, despite a year left on his contract. Nikarima criticised the timing of the announcement midway through a 3-test series in England, but says it won't distract Johnson as the Kiwis prepare for Game 2 on Monday morning. And New Zealand supercar drivers Scott McLaughlin couldn't back up the fastest qualifying time in practice 2 after crashing into a wall at Pukekohe Park today. Walking away unhurt, McLaughlin is expected to be ready for qualifying tomorrow. That's the news.
Tonight on Night's Country Life meets a shepherd who uses drones as well as dogs to muster stock. Super Groove is the Friday night live act. Our Something for the Weekend is something to do with watching paint dry. And because it's the anniversary of the Battle of El Alamein, we have a Sonic Tonic dedicated to turning points on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And we have a story just to hand. Porerua's North City Shopping Centre has been evacuated due to a fire this afternoon. The centre confirmed on Facebook that emergency services were on site. Now to Met Service weather. To midnight tomorrow, heavy rain and strong wind warnings in force for parts of the southern and central New Zealand. So for Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, fine. Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and the central high country, fine today, occasional rain tomorrow and severe northwest gales in Wellington. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Marlborough and Nelson, fine today, scattered rain tomorrow and severe northwest gales in Wairarapa and Marlborough. Bulla and Northern Westland, rain developing tonight with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms tomorrow. Southern Westland and Fiordland, rain developing this afternoon with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms, northerly gales in exposed places. Canterbury, scattered light rain developing tonight but heavier falls about the headwaters, northwest gales tomorrow, severe about the high country. Otago and Southland, scattered rain developing this afternoon, heavy about the headwaters, northwest gales in exposed places. And for the Chatham Islands, a few showers today, cloud increasing tomorrow. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina, and we'll bring you updates on the fire in Porirua as more details come to hand. But coming up, could reusable plastic bags really kill 20 New Zealanders a year? ACT leader David Seymour seems to think so, but a microbiologist says it's rubbish. Plus, we're at the cheapest petrol station in the country, why motorists are flocking to a self-serve pumps in Atiamuri, where unleaded 91 is just $2.10 a litre. But we begin tonight with the case of convicted drug smuggler Karel Schrubeck. The Czech Republic is soon to launch efforts to extradite him. It's the latest twist in a messy controversy for which the blame is being sheeted in all directions. Here's our political reporter Craig McCulloch.
Karel Schrubeck is a wanted man in the Czech Republic and they want him back pronto. Its Justice Ministry has issued a statement to local media saying it will lodge an extradition request as soon as possible.
Interpol is a truly global organisation working to turn back crime.
Schrubeck has a checkered past. He entered New Zealand on a false passport in 2003 and is now in prison for importing 5 kilos of MDMA with a street value of $375,000. But Interpol states he's wanted in his home country, charged with disorderly conduct, damaging property and attacking a police officer. The Czech ministry says it had been holding off requesting extradition, having been advised by New Zealand it would be quicker to wait for him to be deported. It says that no longer looks possible, given the immigration minister has granted Schrobeck residency. The case now becoming a serious headache for the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern.
From what I've seen, this hasn't been good enough.
The government has been under fire over the matter. The Immigration Minister, Ian Galloway, won't explain why he decided to let Schrobeck stay here, citing privacy and legal reasons. He also declined to be interviewed on Checkpoint. Yesterday, though, he launched an investigation into the case, saying he'd learnt new allegations which could change his decision. Jacinda Ardern continuing to back him.
Obviously, he had certain information put in front of him, and now we have contradictory information in the public domain. Of course, that's not good enough. He's gone back to his department and is working through those issues, and we've agreed that needs to happen quickly, and we need to hear a response quickly.
The opposition wants the Immigration Minister's head. The National MP, Michael Woodhouse, says Mr Galloway alone is responsible.
It's an inexplicable decision, and it shows he's not up to the job.
But a former minister, Tuariki Delamere, says there's plenty of blame to go around.
It should never have been on his desk in the first place. Jonathan Coleman should have deported him in 2009 when the passport was discovered to be fake. So I don't know how he stayed that one. And then Nathan Guy should have deported him when he was charged, and so should have Woodhouse.
The National Party disputes that. Mr Woodhouse says it never came across his or any other National Minister's desk, and he says there was no chance for them to deport Schrobeck earlier because he'd been arrested on other crimes.
He created victims in New Zealand, and they have a right for those charges to be prosecuted. It wasn't possible, and Immigration New Zealand have made this very clear, it wasn't possible to present a file to the Minister of the day until that process had completed. When it was, the Minister was Ian Galloway.
Immigration officials are also under the pump. Tuariki Delamere says the entire case smacks of incompetence.
I actually think the Minister would do well to actually enlarge the inquiry into the whole department because there is so much that's wrong at the moment.
Similar musings too from an Immigration Minister, Alistair McClymont.
What I see every day is immigration officials hiding information from the Minister and putting barriers up between people who want to put information to the Minister and are prevented from doing so. So from my point of view, this is not particularly surprising that these sorts of mistakes were made because they happen every day.
Look, if that turns out to be the case, we would absolutely need to rectify that and get to the bottom of that. For me, it's about resolving this particular issue and then seeing if there was a systemic issue at play.
Immigration New Zealand outright rejects the claims. It says it regularly updates the Minister on a range of matters. In this case, it says officials provided Mr Galloway with all the relevant information they had at the time. The department's review into the whole schmozzle could take as long as 3 weeks, and that's 3 weeks longer than the government would like. Atu iti whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Craig McCulloch.
After 6 tonight, we'll speak to former Immigration Minister Michael Woodhouse, who has called for Mr Galloway to resign. He'll be with us live. A scientist has slammed ACT leader David Seymour's comments about killer reusable shopping bags, labelling them as irresponsible. Mr Seymour says the government's decision to ban single-use plastic bags could be killing up to 20 New Zealanders a year. He says research in the US shows that people using reusable bags are susceptible to diseases such as Campylobacter from chicken. But microbiologist Susie Wiles says the paper he's basing his information on is ludicrous. Matt Chatterton reports.
In August, the government announced it would rid the country of thin, single-use plastic bags by July next year. Mr Seymour says the decision was made too hastily and is putting New Zealanders at risk. He admits pollution in the world's oceans needs to be addressed, but he says the blame for that lies with African and Asian countries, not New Zealand.
The problem of New Zealanders letting go of their plastic shopping bags and having those end up in the sea is a problem, but an absolutely tiny one, and not a problem that justifies the level of inconvenience and potentially even public health danger that will come from a ban on plastic bags.
Mr Seymour is basing his claims on 2013 research from George Mason University that found 5 people a year die in San Francisco from food-related infections such as E. coli and Campylobacter after using reusable bags contaminated with the disease. San Francisco banned non-compostable bags in 2007. The research found 97% of shoppers didn't regularly wash their bags. It concluded that any health costs associated with the ban of plastic bags in San Francisco wiped out any savings from reduced litter. However, Professor Susie Wiles at Auckland University says this research has already been debunked in the US.
So it's written by two professors, essentially, of law and economics, who are not microbiologists, not public health experts, and they've taken a data set around people who are hospitalised or deaths in San Francisco and looked at kind of before plastic bags were banned and then afterwards, and then drawn a whole bunch of conclusions, which if anybody who was in public health would have looked at would have said not true at all.
Ms Wiles says Mr Seymour does have a point, albeit misguided.
I do think we need to have a little bit more education, of how people should be using their bags and how you should be treating different kinds of foodstuffs. But to take I'm not even going to call it a study, to take this information and then to draw the conclusions that they have is irresponsible, actually.
Fellow food microbiologist at Massey University, John Palmer, agreed that there is a risk to reusing bags that contain meat. However, there are solutions.
We freeze it, so all chicken is sold frozen. None of it is sold fresh, including breast things. That will reduce the risk of contamination, cross-contamination. Or we allow plastic bags only for meat products. So you can put your chicken breast in another separate bag and keep it separate.
David Seymour says he's happy to be proven wrong, but until then, he'll stick to his message.
I use plastic bags, they're very convenient, and you know what I do when I'm finished with them? I just don't put them in the ocean.
For Checkpoint, Matt Chatterton.
And we would love to know how you feel about this issue. Are reusable plastic bags a breeding ground for germs? You can text us on 2101 or you can email us checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. It's been revealed that another pilot reported problems with a Lion Air jet that later crashed into the sea off Indonesia, killing all 189 people on board. The pilot on the earlier flight requested permission to turn back after takeoff because of technical problems. Investigators will soon examine the Boeing 737 MAX jet's flight recorder. It was recovered from the seafloor yesterday, but divers are still searching for the cockpit voice recorder, and questions around the airworthiness of the craft are mounting as new and alarming reports emerge from those who were on board the aircraft in the days before the crash. The ABC's Anne Barker is in Jakarta.
Passengers on flight JT43 on Sunday from Bali to Jakarta are lucky to be alive. One of the pilots on board has since revealed he made an urgent request to turn back to Bali minutes after takeoff because of technical problems, but he managed to resolve the problems and continue on to Jakarta. Barely 8 hours later, the same 737 MAX 8 aircraft plunged into the sea after a different pilot also reported technical problems and asked to return to Jakarta. An airport official, Herson, in Bali, has told the Reuters news agency how the pilot on Sunday updated the control tower to say the plane was now flying normally and he no longer needed to return to the Bali airport.
The captain himself was confident enough to fly from Jakarta to Denpasar.
The pilot of another plane coming in to land in Bali has also told how he was ordered to circle above the airport and overheard the Lion Air pilot making a pan-pan call, as it's known, which is one step down from a Mayday alert.
Because of the pan-pan call, we were told to hold off. The Lion plane requested to return back to Bali 5 minutes after takeoff. But then the pilot said the problem had been resolved and he was going ahead to Jakarta.
But the pilots kept the plane at a lower than usual altitude, and passengers later complained that the flight was like a roller coaster ride. One man, Dia Madani, said the seatbelt sign was never turned off.
When the plane took off, it climbed and then went down. It rose again and then dropped again, violently shaking. Everyone in the plane shouted, Allahu Akbar, Subhanallah. We recited every prayer we knew.
The airport official Herson says the Bali flight had a speed and altimeter problem, but the captain was eventually confident the plane was airworthy and pressed on.
He double-checked to ensure that they could fly.
The plane landed in Jakarta shortly before 11 p.m, where Lion Air says the technical issues were checked and resolved and the plane was declared safe to fly. Less than 8 hours later, it plunged into the sea after another pilot had requested permission to return to base. Lion Air has declined to comment on the claims, citing the ongoing crash investigation, though it maintains the technical issues in the Bali flight were resolved according to procedure. Indonesia's Transport Minister has suspended the airline's technical director on the grounds he had ultimate responsibility for the plane's safety. Navy divers yesterday recovered the plane's flight data recorder from the sea floor, giving hope that investigators will soon have a better picture of what happened, not only on Monday, but also during the flight from Bali.
Anne Barker reporting. Fuel prices have dropped 10 cents a litre across the country, but motorists in the capital aren't celebrating yet. The price of petrol reached record highs of $2.49 a litre in Wellington last month. Motorists are now paying 17 cents less in the central city, but is it making a difference to their back pockets? Mediana Johnson with this report.
While some motorists were glad to see the price drop, not all Wellingtonians are convinced they are seeing the savings.
It's still pretty high, so not really. It's not enough to notice it. Put some gas in yesterday and I think it was $2.39.9. So under $2 a litre would be nice.
No, not at all.
You don't drive much?
I do. Well, actually, I catch the train into Wellington. I live in Kapiti. But we filled up on the weekend. I think it was really expensive.
It feels much better then. That every 5 cents just make a difference. So yeah, it's quite nice to see it goes down a bit. So it makes our commute much easier now and stuff.
One motorist said he mainly fuels up on the other side of the Rimutakas, where the price of fuel is a lot lower.
I live in the Wairarapa, where it's a little bit cheaper than here, actually. So
yeah,
but I don't see it going down much.
How much cheaper is it out in the Wairarapa?
Well, I think it was around $2.20 or mid-20s. So it's a little bit cheaper because we've got Gull over there and Allied as well.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said last month that motorists are being fleeced at the pump, saying we pay the highest pre-tax cost for fuel in the OECD. AA spokesperson Mark Stockdale says the record high prices last month were due to a spike in the global price of crude oil. Mr Stockdale says the price drop isn't the result of political pressure, but the fact crude oil prices have since fallen 14%.
It seems to us that the fuel companies are simply passing on the fact that it's now costing them less to import fuel, and they're passing that lower cost on to motorists through reductions in the pump price. So it's really linked to what's been happening overseas rather than anything that's been happening domestically.
Mark Stockdale says that he can't say whether petrol prices will continue to drop. However, Z Energy said yesterday that they expect prices to remain stable. Ko Mediana Johnson, TNA.
Meanwhile, a small self-service petrol station in the middle of the North Island is proving a magnet for motorists in search for the cheapest fuel in the country. At the Aotea Muri Gull station on State Highway 1 between Tokoroa and Taupō, fuel prices are almost 30 cents a litre cheaper than other areas around New Zealand. Prices this week at the station for 91 unleaded fuel sit at $2.10 a litre. And as John Boynton discovered, motorists are driving for miles to fill up.
As traffic thunders past on State Highway 1, there's a steady stream of vehicles pulling in to fuel up at the Gull station in Aotea Muri. Mandy Burkett clocks up thousands of kilometres in her job as a drinks distributor, travelling across the North Island. And she's a frequent visitor to the petrol pumps at Aotea Muri.
Yeah, I come here every week and I fuel up here. It's great. Yeah, it's the cheapest I can find. My parents stop in here every time they go north. I always tell everyone to stop here, grab a drink and fuel up for cheap.
Miss Burkett says the rising cost of fuel is hitting the pockets of small business owners.
With people like me, I'm a small business owner and I do about 1,000 Ks a week. So it's a huge impact, and in the last 2 years it's risen, 50 cents a litre, so that's a big impact.
She understands the need to move away from consuming fuel and would love to buy an electric car, but it's unaffordable at the moment.
To make it for the general public to be able to afford one, I looked at one the other day, it's $58,000, so that's a bit out of the general Joe Bloggs' reach.
When RNZ visited the petrol station yesterday, the price of 91 unleaded fuel was $2.10 and diesel was $1.36 per litre.
And how long have you been coming here for?
Gosh, probably about a year.
I helped Tokorua local Anita to fill her car up.
And how did you find out about this spot? Is it just living locally?
Yeah.
How busy does it get here?
Sometimes it's pretty busy, especially on the weekends. Yeah, that'll do.
Sorry.
You're right.
Did I overfill?
No.
Another Tokorua local, Trevor Connell, made the trip out to Atiamuri with his family to fill up his car, which is a 10-minute drive south.
Primo, mate, it's worth coming out here, eh? You know, we're from Tokanet and we're just out for a drive and just thought, come stop in. If the gas is cheap, and it's cheap here, mate. It's always cheap here. It's the best place in New Zealand, I think. But I was sitting on the news and it was the cheapest place in New Zealand or something for gas. So, yeah, mate, that's why we're here. Thought, yep, sweet as. Get your money for your gas, eh? That's well worth it, I reckon.
David McKechnie has owned the shop beside the station for the last 2 years and says simple economics is the reason for the cheap prices.
The logical answer is because it's in the middle of nowhere. That's just least, don't have to pay any staff or anything, so I assume, and where it is, it's fairly frequently used.
At peak times in the weekend, Mr McKechnie says thousands of vehicles can pour through the station. And fuel isn't the only popular purchase.
They make the best pork crackling in New Zealand, so that makes it even better.
I sell a bit of that.
That's the best seller, yeah. They come for the fuel and the pork crackling.
Last month, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern ruled out any fuel tax for the regions while she's in power. Aucklanders had an 11.5 cents a litre tax added to the price of fuel in July. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko John Boynton aho.
Staff at Google offices around the world have staged an unprecedented series of walkouts in protest at the company's treatment of women. The employees are demanding several key changes in how sexual misconduct allegations are dealt with at the firm, including a call to end forced arbitration, a move which would make it possible for victims to sue. The BBC's Amal Rajan reports.
From within one of the most powerful companies in history, a global uprising. From New York to Dublin, Google staff united. In Berlin and Singapore and Zurich, and in the rain in London, protesting at their treatment. Just after 11 a.m. in each time zone, hundreds walked out, leaving messages behind on their desks.
When things happen in numbers and they see a large group of people speaking up, then I think that's when things start to change.
I'm walking out along with other colleagues in support of anyone in any workplace who has been harassed, and to ensure that perpetrators are not protected and not rewarded.
As so often in the cultural moment we're living through, seething anger was kept below the surface until one explosive case was made public. The New York Times alleged that Andy Rubin, the creator of Google's Android mobile software, was given a massive payoff after he was accused of sexual harassment. He denies the accusation and says the payment has been exaggerated. But at a company where 3/4 of executives are men and former female employees are suing the company over contested allegations they were underpaid, Mr. Rubin's case in a male-dominated industry has prompted fury.
I think that a lot of people come to Google because they are really idealistic and they do believe in this idea of the company standing for something larger than just making money. And so to see this sort of behavior and to see it condoned at the very highest levels of the company, I think has been extraordinarily upsetting for employees.
Google employees are demanding an end to private arbitration for cases of alleged abuse, publication of an internal report about historic harassment, and a representative on the company board.
The problem for Google is that, like so many tech companies, it was founded by idealistic visionaries who claim to be champions of both equality and liberal values. Now the world has changed and a less palatable reality is beginning to emerge. The Me Too movement has encouraged workers to speak up, and a fissure seems to be opening between workers and bosses at the top of the tech sector.
Google's boss said, employees have raised constructive ideas for how we can improve our policies and our processes going forward. We are taking in all their feedback so we can turn these ideas into action.
Well, I think it's a moment to be relished, and it's because women have normally had to do this on their own, take their own case, make their own complaint, or suffer in silence, or have an NDA, you know, signing a gagging order. And suddenly, you know, women are coming together saying, our power is in doing this collectively. That's what's going to make the change.
A global movement which big tech did so much to create is belatedly turning on Silicon Valley's proudest names.
Amal Rajan with that report. And coming up, former Immigration Minister Michael Woodhouse joins us live on the case of Carol Schrubeck. Melanoma rates in New Zealand fall for the first time in a generation, and why driverless cars could soon be cruising around abandoned streets in Christchurch's red zone. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget, you can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. But first, here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
The National Party is dismissing claims it could have deported Czech drug smuggler Karel Schrubeck while it was in power. Tuariki Delamere, who was the minister in the late 1990s and helped Schrubeck gain residency in 2008, says former national ministers all failed to deport him when they could. But one of the ministers, Michael Woodhouse, says the case never came across his or any other national minister's desk. A fire in Kmart has prompted the evacuation of Porerua's North City shopping centre this afternoon. Fire and Emergency says the centre's alarm was activated just after 4 o'clock. The fire is now out. 4 crews and a snorkel truck were sent to the mall, and there'll be an investigation into how the fire started. The chief executive of the Taranaki Rugby Union says replacing the earthquake-prone Yarrow Stadium with a covered stadium would be a boost for the whole region. The Taranaki Stadium Trust has revealed that a covered stadium costing up to $250 million is one of the options being proposed for Yarrow. Emergency doctors say electric scooter users should wear helmets and ride slower after a spate of injuries in Auckland and Christchurch. The scooters only hit the streets of the two cities 3 weeks ago, but the Australasian College for Emergency Medicine says there have been as many as 3 injuries a day. A whale that is rarely seen along the New Zealand coast has been stranded on a Waikato beach. A southern bottlenose whale stranded on Port Waikato Beach about 11 o'clock this morning. The whales aren't normally found in shallow waters. A person is in a critical condition after driving a car into a bollard in Auckland. The police say the person has been taken to North Shore Hospital after the crash on Silverdale Street just before 4. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thanks, Katrina. Madison Reedy is in the studio to talk business. So, a power company. This is puzzling me, Madison. A power company is telling its customers to go elsewhere?
It is. I know. It seems bizarre.
Counterintuitive.
I don't think I've ever seen a headline or written a headline like that in news before, particularly business news. This is the startup powerdirect.co.nz. Now, it's a subsidiary. It's owned by mytax.co.nz. And it's just a startup. It started in June and it's based in Nelson. And as you mentioned, it sells wholesale power, which is also known as spot pricing. So they buy it off the generators and then sell it at whichever price they buy it straight to the customer. So they pass on all of the costs. Now, the aim of that is typically to save customers money, but we are at a time at the moment where the power industry is having major supply issues. They've been called unprecedented. The chief executive of Power Direct even called this a once-in-a-lifetime event. And what's caused that is a combined mix of low levels in the hydro lakes. We haven't had enough rain to fill all of those catchments, which have actually levelled out recently, but prices are still crazy high because there's also a pipeline outage at the Pohokura gas field, which is the largest gas field in the country. And also Huntly Power Station is being turned on as the industry backup, but that obviously costs more to run because you need coal. So the Electricity Authority in its monthly report last month said that this was extremely unusual pricing for October, particularly for spring and the weather conditions that we usually see. Prices have actually hit per megawatt hour on average $300, and typically in October they're $100, so they've almost tripled on average in the past month. Now, I put all of that to the chief executive of powerdirect.co.nz. His name's Lester Binns, and I said, you've called this a once-in-a-lifetime event, but if it continues, do you think that your company could ever start up again?
For us to decide to stay in the game, and we will consider it when it happens, I think we need the government to look at why something like this can occur. because, in my opinion, it is not costing the generators to generate power at what they're charging at the moment. It seems a little bit off.
You called this a once-in-a-lifetime event. Does that scare you that this may happen again in your lifetime and make Power Direct an unsustainable company?
Exactly. And look, we follow there's many other operators doing wholesale pricing because, it is, meant to be better over the long run. But, it's certainly going to be in the back of our minds. And I think unless we see some changes to the industry, I guess it'll be something we have to consider in a month or two when this thing sorts itself out.
That's Lester Binns, the Chief Executive of powerdirect.co.nz.
He said there in a month or two when this sorts itself out. Is he being optimistic there? Because his customers are presumably they're no contract type customers, like you can leave at the drop of the hat.
Exactly, and most spot pricing retailers are like that. So that's where they differ and tend to have that competitive edge compared to the more traditional large gen-tailers, which are generation power companies, and also the retailers, your big ones like Meridian Energy, Contact, Trust Power, all of those. So yes, typically customers can just ditch and leave, and that's exactly what they've been bizarrely told to do by this company.
It is also interesting because they're saying it's pressure on hydro, where we're a bit dry coming into the spring, when there is this great push to convert to 100% natural generation as well.
Exactly. Well, already 83 to 85% of New Zealand's electricity is generated by renewable sources. So that's your wind and your power and solar. Now, water is the most popular one. Next would be wind. Windy Wellington. There's certainly a lot of renewable energy created down there. The industry already has complained that they can't afford to invest in large assets like this anymore. So we haven't actually had any announcements lately except for a wind farm, which is actually going to be built in the next couple of years. And that will be the first renewable energy asset built for quite a while.
Yeah, and I know lots of people have raised concerns about surety of supply if you're relying largely on hydro. Let's move on to Spark. Spark's managing director has been talking about 5G.
And he also was talking about the government today at the annual meeting. So he certainly had a lot to say about both, and he certainly linked them together as well. So 5G is this faster, larger, essentially better internet network that a lot of other countries rely on now. So it's obviously the upgrade to your 3G and your 4G. Spark's already preparing for this. They were one of the first, and all of its competitors like Vodafone are following suit. Or the entire telecommunications industry expects this to be the next big thing, and they're obviously already preparing for it with data demand, as Spark says, doubling every year. So Spark has already put...
Doubling every year.
That's how much data people are using, particularly with the likes of Netflix and things like that, because to stream video, that just soaks up your data like crazy. And 5G is supposed to be better for video demand. It's supposed to deliver things faster, quicker, and at a better quality. So it's going to feed our addiction, basically. Exactly, feed our addiction, and they're going to profit off our addiction too. But Spark has already rolled out a 4G and a 4.5G. They obviously want to overlay all of their existing infrastructure with a 5G. But what needs to happen first for them to be able to do that is that the government, this is where they come in, they need to sell some of their radio spectrum space so that Spark can do this. And the government hasn't made a decision on that yet. So at Spark's annual meeting today, the Managing Director, Simon Muta, he said, basically, hurry up, we want to get a move on, and it's costing us more to have this 4.5G and 4G. And if we can roll out 5G, it should also bring the price of broadband down. And he did give a bit of a warning there that if they can't do this anytime soon, then it will keep the price of broadband increasing. He also mentioned the Chinese technology company here, Huawei, which seems like a bit of a segue, but they did say that they plan on considering using them to build this 5G network once they have the ability to do so. And there's been quite a lot of concern about this particular company in Australia, where officials have actually already banned Huawei from building any of its infrastructure networks because of security intelligence concerns, which all started with a report out of the United Kingdom raising those.
Yeah. So what has been happening on the markets today?
The NZX Top 50 index closed down ever so slightly, almost not worth mentioning, just 8 points to 8,844. The New Zealand dollar is still buying higher. It's rebounded in the past couple of days, so that's currently buying at 66.5 US cents, 92.4 to the Australian Australian and 51.2 British pence.
It's going to be an interesting next week, isn't it, Madison? What's coming up?
I'm quite excited, can you tell?
Yeah.
On Monday, we have the findings being released of the Financial Markets Authority and the Reserve Bank of New Zealand.
Yeah, so anyone with a bank account should be excited about this.
They certainly should. This is the Banking Conduct and Culture Review, which was instigated here. Well, the regulators here said, let's do the same as what they did in Australia. In Australia, it was a Royal Commission of Inquiry, which is more of a name and shame. The FMA here has already said that that's not the intent of their one. They just wanted to knock on the doors of the banks and talk to all of their staff all around the country, from the top to the bottom. They've already spoken to the chairman of all of these companies, the chief executives, and also their bank tellers in the regions as well. So they've done a pretty good clean out, and then on Monday they're going to air all of that laundry. Whether or not it will be dirty or clean, we will find out, and I'm sure I'll be the one to tell you about it.
Because obviously the banks here have said there is nothing like what is going on or has been seen to be going on in Australia.
They've always separated themselves from their Australian parents, and that will all remain to be seen as to whether or not that actually is true. Obviously, we had a lot of bank financial results this week just gone, so I put that to all of the chief executives, and they all said that, you know, we can't second guess or, you know, preview what's going to happen in this report. They've just said, look, we've let them in. That was the best we could do.
They're confident in their own culture.
They
maintain
are.
that. Yeah,
they are.
Hey, thank you for joining us. That's Madison Reedy with all our business news from the day. To overseas news now. Donald Trump has announced what amounts to a crackdown on those looking to seek asylum in the United States. With midterm elections just days away, Mr. Trump has followed up his decision to send armed troops to the US-Mexico border with a change in policy over asylum seekers. Current US law says that anyone who arrives to the US may apply for asylum based on a well-founded fear of persecution. And Trump's proposed change in policy means those people can only enter the US through designated ports. The BBC's North America editor, John Sopel, has the latest.
It feels as though America is going onto a war footing. Thousands of troops are being mobilised. Destination, the southern border. The enemy, men, women and children winding their way up through Mexico. 15,000 soldiers are being deployed to stop immigrants on foot from entering the United States. Illegally, says the president. And with 5 days to go until crucial congressional elections, this issue has taken on a deeply political hue.
At this very moment, large, well-organized caravans of migrants are marching toward our southern border. Some people call it an invasion. It's like an invasion. They have violently overrun the Mexican border. You saw that 2 days ago. These are tough people in many cases. A lot of young men, strong men, and a lot of men that maybe we don't want in our country. But again, we'll find that out through the legal process.
There have been allegations from the president and his surrogates that this straggling caravan of people from Central America have members of Islamic State among them, that they're violent criminals, that they're carrying diseases which will infect other Americans. No evidence of any of these things has been provided, but the overriding narrative, be very, very afraid. This is an invasion. And Donald Trump has put out this video which his opponents say is racist, with its implication that all immigrants, like the central character in this ad, are criminals. The ad has brought a chorus of criticism, much of it from prominent Republicans. But fear of immigration among many Americans is real, and the president is tapping into that.
Democrats want open borders, and they want to invite caravan after caravan into our country, which brings crime upon crime.
Donald Trump is spending next to no time at the White House at the moment. He's on the road attending rallies every day between now and the midterms. He's got a positive message to tell on the economy. But among his supporters, it's nothing like as effective as his message on immigration. It's a simple calculation. Fear is a more potent weapon than hope.
The BBC's John Sopel with that story. Driverless cars could soon be cruising around abandoned streets in Christchurch's red zone if plans for autonomous vehicle testing get the green light. The New Zealand Transport Agency wants to promote Christchurch internationally as a destination for testing new transport technologies, including ones that fly, before they mix with pedestrians and other traffic. The agency says residential streets in the red zone are the prime spot for the testing, and there aren't many places like it anywhere else in the world. Nita Blake-Person reports.
More than 8 years on from the Canterbury earthquakes, many of the roads that run through the red zone are still intact. NZTA spokesman Jim Harlan says they mimic neighbourhoods around the world, but with no one living or visiting there, they present a unique opportunity.
Minus most of the houses, you've actually still got a full urban grid. So that means if you bring your vehicle there, you can set up different scenarios in terms of what might be happening, people on footpaths and stopping times and all of that, with different quality roading surfaces. At the moment, there's some good quality and there's some poor quality, and that's an attraction.
The testing would only happen in a small area of the red zone, but Mr Harlan says it wouldn't just be limited to land-based vehicles.
There is an electric flying aircraft being tested in the Canterbury area. One of the opportunities that the red zone would provide, because it's reasonable distance from the airport, you do have airspace above the grid pattern, so potentially it could be used to test aerial vehicles using the grid.
Vicky Buck chairs the Christchurch City Council's Innovation and Sustainability Committee and says it's exactly the type of project the city wants to embrace.
There are a number of pre-existing roads and transport infrastructure on it which make it ideal for this, where you could actually trial these things ahead of them getting their road testing approvals. And that's an issue for a number of countries. And obviously it would be flexible enough that you could trial them for those various countries' specifications as well.
She says the vehicle testing won't cost the council anything and would happen in an area of the red zone near Bexley.
So it's not an expensive thing to do. It's using what's already there in a way that is innovative and actually allowing for testing that would be quite difficult to find in most cities. Most cities don't have sort of closed off roads and things sitting there.
Plans around the testing have been in the pipeline for some time and seem to have overwhelming support.
I mean, there are autonomous electric vehicles being trialled everywhere in the world. All of them have to get approvals to go on the road. So, the risks, I guess, I can't think that they're very high unless suddenly the world stops innovating.
Land Information New Zealand is working with the Transport Agency to make the land available for testing. A decision is expected to be made before the end of the year. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Nita Blake-Person, aho.
Relocating to a state-of-the-art covered stadium costing up to $250 million is one of the options being proposed for the earthquake-prone Yarrow Stadium in New Plymouth. But the hook in that the Taranaki Stadium Trust, which owns Yarrow, says it can only afford a basic fix of less than $50 million. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
The covered stands at Yarrow, the spiritual home to Taranaki rugby, have been off limits since June after being declared an earthquake risk. Fans who bothered to turn up to Taranaki Bulls matches have been camped out at either end of the ground, giving the stadium an eerie atmosphere. It's been blamed for Taranaki's dismal season, which saw them relegated to the championship and lose the Ramfurly Shield. Taranaki Stadium Trust boss Mike Neild says the good news is that engineers say the existing stadium can be fixed, meaning the community has a full range of options.
At one end of the scale, you've got repair the existing stands and put them back into production and get the stadium up and running again, right the way through to building a brand new stadium at the existing site or indeed a brand new stadium at a different site.
Mr Neild says a repair would cost less than $50 million and building a new stadium at Yarrow 4 to 5 times that much, and more still if it was covered. Relocating to Pukekura Raceway, adjacent to the city's indoor sports arena, has also been sketched out for a similar price. Neild says if the community wants the Rolls-Royce option, the spanner in the works will be funding.
If the good public of Taranaki say no, just repair it and bring it back to where it was, that's what we'll do, and we'll get on with doing that. But if they come back and say, no, we want a much more extended solution, the challenge then comes to us as a group of local authorities to say, well, how are we going to fund this?
The Chief Executive of the Taranaki Rugby Union is Jeremy Parkinson. He says the union could live with a basic fix at Yarrows.
If it's the most practical is a fix and the stadium can be reinstated back to what it was, that's as good as anything in the country.
But Mr Parkinson wouldn't say no to a covered stadium either.
If we're really looking to put the region on the map, there's only one, the Rolls-Royce model, if they are talking a covered stadium, there's only one in the country, and that's in Dunedin, and look what that's done for that region and the economic development there. If we could get a covered stadium here, it would be huge.
The New Plymouth District Council transferred ownership of Yarrow to the Taranaki Regional Council in 2014. The District Council operates the stadium and it also owns Pukekura Raceway. In a statement, the Mayor, Neil Holdham, says it is important the options for Yarrow are weighed up carefully and that the public has its say. Mr Holdham says the city should have an international quality stadium and he looked forward to the Stadium Trust presenting detailed costings and options. He did not answer questions about whether the District Council would contribute to the cost of repairs or a new build. On the streets of New Plymouth, there were mixed views on what to do.
Well, I reckon they should start from scratch, build a new one.
Put it somewhere else. It's not traditional. Yarrows is Yarrows, and that's where it should be.
A multi-purpose stadium would be an amazing thing to have in New Plymouth.
I like the one at the Pukekura Park.
New Plymouth is in need of a more versatile venue. It's not all about sport to me.
I personally think it needs to stay at Yarrows.
They've already spent about 30 million on it. Why didn't they do it properly the first time?
The Regional Council controls the Stadium Trust. Its chairman, David McLeod, says borrowing will be required to fund whatever option is chosen, and there are limits to how much the council can borrow. He says if the community wants an upgraded facility, then financial support will be needed from other funders. Formal public consultation will take place next year after options and costings are put to the community. Ina mutu mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Robin Martinaho.
We are getting so much feedback coming in on David Seymour's claims that bacteria-ridden reusable bags could be killing up to 20 New Zealanders a year. Preventing contamination, we have this in from Linda, who says, I take some newspapers with me to wrap around meat products. Easy solution, David Seymour, she says. Chicken bag issue is the next one headed up from Alison. Not once in about a decade has my chicken or other meat packaged leak from its many layers of plastic tray and cling wrap. I would consider it a risk if you were dropping an unwrapped raw chook directly into a reusable bag. Otherwise, it's just justification to be lazy at the expense of the environment. David Seymour is on the line. Hi, David.
Hey Lisa, how are you going?
Very well. We just thought at Checkpoint we had a moral obligation to pass this information on to you in case you intended to go out and do grocery shopping over the weekend. Why can't you take a bit of newspaper to wrap up some of the meat you're purchasing?
Well, I admire your correspondence because they're people who are early adopters of reusable bags. They're people who probably put their reusable bags in the washing machine when they do their daily wash and dry. But that's not the effect of a mandatory imposition of these bags on everybody through the ban on reusable. This is actually a policy that will mean that a whole lot of people who wouldn't have otherwise chosen to use reusable bags are forced to use them because there's no other option, and that's when you get problems.
So you're just using this issue as an excuse to complain about reusable plastic bags and having to take a Hessian sack to the supermarket. Is that what you're saying?
Lisa, you know I don't need an excuse to complain. I complain at the drop of a hat. But actually, I do think it is important, if we're going to be good environmental custodians, if we're people who care about the future of our planet, to use the best evidence and the best science when we make policy decisions. And the fact is that, that the evidence we have is that a reputable university, George Mason, out of Virginia in the United States, has studied the effects of a plastic bag ban in San Francisco, a city that has a culture an economy and a society very similar to ours.
I have to
and
bust in on you there.
Wait a second. When they put the ban in place, what they found was that they had an increase in hospital admissions for foodborne illness and foodborne illness-related deaths. That's really sad. But those are the facts. And I think
well, they're not, according to Susie Wiles.
It should consider the evidence.
You would know Susie Wiles. She's a very well-known microbiologist. She said that the paper that you're basing your conclusions on, the paper is ludicrous, and that it's irresponsible to spread these concerns, and that the people who conducted what she regards as a survey, not a study, were not qualified in microbiology at all. So it's kind of a bit of a bogus piece of research, she reckons.
Yeah, and similarly, you will have seen the commentary today, which was credible, which is why you decided to have me on and why this has become a news issue all day. Public health experts from within New Zealand said, actually, David Seymour's got a point. So, yes, she's got a view. I doubt that she used the kind of emotive language that you did, but the wider point stands that actually we need to have a better, more scientifically based debate on environmental policy in New Zealand than what we've had to date. And just remember that the Prime Minister announced on the day that the public consultation on plastic bag bans began that the result of the consultation would be a ban. Now, I don't know how Eugenie Sage, the Environment Minister, feels about that, having prepared the consultation paper, but I think we need to do better than simply having knee-jerk, emotive-based environmental
we've got to go, but you can report...
Because the environment's about science.
Got to go, but you can report back on how you go with your reusable bag and the newspaper that you're going to wrap around your chicken, see how it works out for you. It has been a Baptist church, a rowdy nightclub, and now Dunedin's Hanover Hall has been transformed into a new performance space for the city. The hall serves as a permanent home for the Dunedin Symphony Orchestra, which has been moving between rehearsal spaces since it started about 53 years ago. But restoring the heritage-listed building to its former glory has been a community effort, with hundreds of thousands of dollars raised to upgrade the hall with an orchestral-grade sound fit-out. Our Otago Southland reporter Tess Brunton attended the official opening earlier today.
Patricia Lean has been a violinist with the Dunedin Symphony Orchestra since its inception nearly 53 years ago. They started out rehearsing in an old villa at the University of Otago, but Ms. Lean says the orchestra has been moving around for years. She says Hanover Hall is very much their home already.
When you look around the room, first of all, we've had these acoustic panels that have been put up all around the room, which obviously enhance the sound, make it feel when you're rehearsing that you're the only one playing actually.
When orchestra members Kelly McWar and Lloyd Williams first discovered the hall in 2015, it had been neglected for several years.
The original beautiful double Remu panel doors had been smashed. We came into the auditorium. All of the gorgeous stained glass windows had been boarded over by black panels because, of course, the nightclub people wanted a dark, evil space. The only natural light was coming in through the holes in the roof.
Miss McWar says the graffiti didn't deter them, and they felt like punching the air when they saw the hall was the right size to host the orchestra. They bought the building, and renovation work started in 2016 with the help of more than 190 community members and organisations, which donated more than $350,000 towards the project. The final price tag for the renovation work is about $750,000. But it won't be just the orchestra benefiting from the fit-out.
The arts struggle all the time. You know, they have costs of venue hire, they have costs of employment costs. So we are hoping that the orchestra will be able to make it available at a reasonable rental so that we can get a bit of a buzz going on in here.
Hanover Hall dates back to the early 1900s, and it was the first Baptist church in Dunedin. The church moved out in 1996 when its congregation outgrew the building, and the hall was sold several times before becoming a well-known student haunt, the Monkey Bar. It was closed about 5 years ago.
We've found this place, the old Hanover Street Baptist Church. Are you interested? And it was a wreck. It had been a bar called the Monkey Bar that many students who once were in Dunedin will recognise. And they saw something in it.
That's how Orchestra Board President Ruth Houghton remembers McWar and Williams approaching her about the hall. She hopes the space will become a hub for performing arts in the city, located only a couple of blocks away from the Octagon. The hall was officially opened by Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern at a private function this morning. Ms Ardern says the heritage building has been given a new lease on life, and it showed the strong community support for the project.
Over $350,000 was raised, which is a fantastic amount and testament to the value that I know this city places on heritage, and I wish we could replicate that all across the country.
A public viewing of the hall will be held on Sunday afternoon between 3 and 5 o'clock. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton Tane.
And the feedback on David Seymour's concerns over reusable bags keeps flooding in. I would rather face the inconvenience of washing my bags than using disposable plastic that simply clogs up landfills and roadsides, rivers or oceans, this person says. David Seymour, another says, is simply grandstanding to try and resurrect his failing political fortunes. Keep it coming.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, ko Katrina Batanaho. The National Party is rejecting claims it could have deported the Czech drug smuggler Karel Srubrek while it was in power. Tuariki Delamere, who was the minister in the late 1990s, helped Srubrek gain residency in 2008. He says former National Ministers Jonathan Coleman, Nathan Guy and Michael Woodhouse all failed to deport him when they could. But Mr Woodhouse says it never came across his or any other National Minister's desk because Srubrek had been arrested on other crimes and couldn't be deported. He says it wasn't possible for immigration officials to present a file to the Minister of the day until the justice process had been completed. He says when it was, Ian Lees-Galloway was the Minister. The Czech Republic is soon to launch efforts to extradite Srubrek from New Zealand. A scientist has criticised the ACT leader David Seymour's comments about killer reusable shopping bags as irresponsible. Mr Seymour says the government's decision to ban single-use plastic bags could be killing up to 20 New Zealanders a year. He says research in the US shows that people using reusable bags are susceptible to disease such as Campylobacter from chicken. But microbiologist Susie Wiles says the paper Mr Seymour is basing his information on is ludicrous.
I do think we need to have a little bit more education, of how people should be using their bags and how you should be treating different kinds of foodstuffs. But to take I'm not even going to call it a study, to take this information and then to draw the conclusions that they have is irresponsible, actually.
The Associate Professor of Microbiology at Auckland University, Susie Wiles. A leading melanoma expert has delivered a stark warning about a particularly dangerous form of the cancer at a summit in Auckland today. John Kelly from the Victorian Melanoma Service in Melbourne says nodular melanomas are often ignored because they resemble persistent pimples or blood blisters. But he says they're responsible for nearly half of fatalities, despite accounting for just 15% of melanomas. Professor Kelly says people should see their doctor if something resembling a pimple and feeling firm doesn't go away after a month. Meanwhile, new research presented to the summit suggests melanoma rates are improving in younger generations due to raising awareness about the harm from too much sun. With less than a week to go before the crucial midterm elections, the US president has once again ramped up his rhetoric on immigration. Speaking at the White House, Donald Trump has outlined changes in immigration rules that target asylum seekers. The BBC's Gary O'Donoghue reports.
President Trump said there was a crisis at the southwest border, targeting the caravan of several thousand people from Central America working its way up through Mexico. The president said they were not innocent people and warned them to turn back. This is an invasion, he said. Mr Trump also savaged the country's asylum laws, falsely suggesting that only 3% of those who claim asylum turn up for their court appearances. He said thousands and thousands of tents would be used to keep people in custody who cross the border illegally, ending the so-called catch and release policy.
Gary O'Donoghue in Washington. Papua New Guinea authorities have moved about 15 refugees back to Manus Island from their Port Moresby motel to make way for the APEC Leaders Summit. The police arrived at 4 o'clock this morning to take the men from the Granville Motel, where about 70 refugees have been staying while they receive medical treatment at nearby Pacific International Hospital. About 50 refugees have been told they'll be moved back to Manus, where more than 600 men have been exiled for 5 years. RNZ Pacific understands about 10 men among the 50 have not finished their treatment. A worker has been electrocuted at a central Christchurch business. A St John spokesperson says an ambulance was called to the Victoria Street premises just after 11 o'clock this morning, but the person had already died from their injuries. Conan Young reports.
The building is a recently constructed office block. 2 fire trucks and a police car also responded to the incident. A WorkSafe spokesperson says the death is now being looked into. They'll not say if the person was a contractor working at the business or if it was their regular workplace. Kei Ototahi ko Conan Young tēnei.
A fire in Kmart has prompted the evacuation of Porerua's North City shopping centre. Fire and Emergency Central Shift Manager Belinda Beats says the centre's alarm was activated just after 4 o'clock this afternoon.
We had at 4:10 was a manual call point activated, followed by a sprinkler system and several 111s to indicate that there was a fire in the mall in Kmart. We have located a fire, but that's being well contained and controlled by the sprinkler system.
Belinda Beats says 4 crews and a ladder truck were sent to the mall, and there'll be an investigation into how the fire, which is now out, started. It's 6:05. To sport, former Silver Ferns great Temepara Bailey has come out of retirement to help her Northern Stars side for the 2019 domestic netball season. The withdrawal of captain Grace Carter from the team because of pregnancy has resulted in the 43-year-old Bailey returning to elite netball 6 years after retiring. Bailey is currently the Stars' assistant coach, a position she'll retain, although it's not yet known if she'll make herself available for the Silver Ferns. The Black Caps bowling coach Shane Jurgensen says he's confident the team will bounce back in the second T20 against Pakistan tomorrow. New Zealand fell into a 2-run deficit. New Zealand fell to a 2-run defeat in the opening game in Abu Dhabi, with Pakistan defending a total of 148. The Black Caps started well but fell away at the end of both innings. But Jurgensen says there's no need to change what they're doing.
We just got to make sure we keep just those little areas we need to sharpen up on the next. And I think if we get those key areas right that we want to just sharpen up, as I said, we'll look for another good solid performance in Game 2.
Shane Jurgensen. After posting the fastest lap time in the opening practice race of the penultimate supercars meet of the year, New Zealand driver Scott McLaughlin was lucky to walk away after driving his Falcon into the wall in race 2 at Pukekohe Park this afternoon. The 25-year-old looked shaken after uncharacteristically losing control at turn 2, locking up and spearing into the wall. McLaughlin is expected to have car 17 ready for qualifying tomorrow. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, Lee Child on his enigmatic hero Jack Reacher, who's about to take to the small screen, I think. I don't know who's going to play him, but it will not be Tom Cruise. We'll talk to the winner of this year's Walters Prize, usually a reliable source of arts kicking. And Reckless Eric is about to tour New Zealand. Last time he came, he said it was closed. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, and there's a heavy rain and strong wind warning in force for parts of southern and central New Zealand. So for Auckland, Northland and Coromandel, fine. Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty and the central high country, fine today, occasional rain tomorrow and severe northwest gales in Wellington. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Marlborough and Nelson, fine today, scattered rain tomorrow and severe northwest gales in Wairarapa and Marlborough. Bulla and northern Westland, rain developing tonight with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms tomorrow. Southern Westland and Fiordland, rain developing this afternoon with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms, northerly gales in exposed places. Canterbury, scattered light rain developing tonight, but heavier falls about the headwaters, northwest gales tomorrow, severe about the high country. Otago and Southland, scattered rain developing this afternoon, heavy about the headwaters, northwest gales in exposed places. And for the Chatham Islands, a few showers today with cloud increasing tomorrow. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Let's return now to where we began the show tonight with revelations the Czech Republic will soon launch efforts to extradite convicted drug smuggler and permanent resident Karel Schrubeck. It's the latest twist in a messy controversy for which the blame is being sheeted in all directions. The current Immigration Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway, says he was only acting on the information he had when he granted residency, but has since announced he will reconsider his decision and has launched an inquiry. Meanwhile, the former Immigration Minister, Michael Woodhouse, is laying the blame firmly on the Minister, and he joins me now. Mr Woodhouse, what more information do you have about Mr Shrewbeck?
Oh, well, I've got a little bit more information, and that will be made apparent in the passage of time. But the point really is that there was
why not
more
now,
than
though?
enough.
Sorry to interrupt,
Well,
but why
I think-
not now? If you're concerned about public interest in this case, why not put it all out there?
Well, it takes some time to verify sources and make sure that we've got our understanding right. It doesn't take that long, frankly. A few days has been enough to gather a great deal of information. And frankly, the Minister had more than enough information to deport him last month when he had the opportunity. The investigation is simply a cover for Lees Galloway to be able to find a reason to change his mind. He should have made a better decision right from the get-go.
But didn't all three former national immigration ministers have all the information they too needed to get rid of this guy?
No, the file never came before any national minister. Immigration New Zealand was very clear about that yesterday. At the time where he became liable for deportation, he was still subject to at least 2 judicial processes. One where he was discharged without conviction on immigration fraud, and then, of course, found not guilty on aggravated robbery charges on a technicality, and then convicted of drug smuggling charges. It's really important that process is completed before deportation liability is considered. The first minister that saw this file was Lees Galloway.
But what about when he was jailed on your watch in 2016? Did you red flag him then?
Well, a file would have been prepared for presentation before the minister. Sometimes that can take months, even years. The first opportunity that Immigration New Zealand had to present the data was this year, and that was Ian Lees Galloway.
So in terms of these revelations that he had permission to return to Europe while he was on bail, do you know that he actually went to the Czech Republic?
I have information that he has, but it hasn't been verified yet. What I do know is that he certainly sought to do that. He sought a variation of his bail conditions. So whether or not he went, he didn't think his health or life would be in danger if he did. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sought the bail condition variation that was considered by the High Court.
Did Immigration New Zealand tell you that he has travelled somewhere in Europe?
No, that's a court transcript that I have from the Auckland High Court. When he was on bail, pending charges of kidnapping and aggravated robbery, his own counsel asked for a variation of those bail conditions at least once, I think twice, in order that he return to the Czech Republic.
Yeah, I understand that, and that is in the public domain. What I'm asking, does Immigration New Zealand have information or had information that he had travelled to Europe, and do you know if that information was passed to the Minister prior to making the decision that he made?
Well, you'll have to ask Immigration New Zealand that.
But you have no knowledge of that?
Well, I know he wanted to go back. I'm pretty sure he did.
But you don't know for
certainly
sure that he
undermines-
went to the Czech Republic at this stage. You've got no evidence that he actually went to the Czech Republic, where this concern is around his safety.
I'm not sure that's relevant to the question of his deportation. The minister had plenty of information. That is actually a side issue, because it wouldn't have changed my mind. He was still liable for deportation and should have gone home for his serious offending.
Isn't it relevant, though, Mr Woodhouse, because obviously there is some concern around Karel Shrewbeck's safety. That is what is being hinted at as to his safety if he were to return to the Czech Republic. So isn't it material if he did go home and entered the country?
If that was a material concern, there were other pathways he could follow, including an asylum claim. The fact that he didn't says to me that he knew he had little chance of success. His appeal to the minister was a Hail Mary request that was agreed to by a gullible and lazy minister that didn't look at the facts.
Do you know what documents he travelled on, what identity he used? When he left, when he applied to go out of the country while on bail, you say that he potentially has gone into Europe. Do you know what identity he used to do that?
I don't have the court documents with me. They're on the RNZ website. You'd probably be able to find the answer to that quicker than I can.
Right, but you don't know off your top of your head if he used a passport in the name of Shrewbeck? to make that trip that you've alleged?
No, but he's one person. I mean, if that was relevant to the minister, he would have the answer to that question.
So you can't stack up anything that you're talking about here. You think he went back to Europe. You can't tell us if he went to the Czech Republic. You don't know whether he used an identity other than the one that would have placed him in danger. You don't have any of those details.
Lisa, I don't have to. What I'm telling you is that there was plenty of information there to make the right decision. He should have been sent home.
But you want the minister to resign, so the expectation is that you have more pieces of the puzzle, that you're basing that call for resignation on some solid information, but you don't seem to have it.
Absolutely. Oh, I have got the information. Everybody knows that information now. It doesn't matter whether he travelled back to the Czech Republic or not. Whether he had a legitimate fear for his safety, frankly, he spent time in jail in the Czech Republic. He spent time in jail in New Zealand. He was worried about what officials and police would do when he got home because he was wanted for a serious assault on a police officer. No wonder he didn't want to go back. The point is, he should have.
You have said basically that there's no need for an investigation. Just get rid of him. Are you still of that view?
What I've said is the reason Lees Galloway is holding an investigation is to give himself cover to find enough information to change his decision. Because if he doesn't come up with a significant new piece of information, his reversal is likely to be appealed in the courts, and it will be a long and difficult process for Lees Galloway to get what he should have done in the first place, which is the deportation order upheld.
Do you think this man has a right to natural justice, though? You're putting all this information into the public domain, some of which hasn't been properly substantiated, and, you know, colouring public opinion towards him before he's even had the opportunity to reply to the allegations through formal channels.
Well, you can feel free to defend him if you like, Lisa. What I know is he is a convicted criminal.
I'm asking about the process.
Who we want here in New Zealand. The process is fine. Actually, a lot of the information I've obtained has come in part from members of the media. So they're also able to get this information. It's not just me. But I come back to the fundamental point. None of that is relevant to the key question of should the minister have made a different decision when the information that he did have was put before him, and the answer is of course he should have.
What if all the information wasn't put before him?
Well, certainly enough was to warrant the signing of the deportation order.
Do you regret any decisions that you made as Immigration Minister?
None spring to mind.
So no mistakes on your watch?
Well, it's not a question of mistakes, Lisa. Every file is different. Everyone requires the careful collection of information and considered judgment about what is right in the circumstances. What I'm saying is this one doesn't even come close to a consideration of the suspension or cancellation of the deportation order. And what really worries me is if Lees Galloway thought this was a good decision, what other decisions has he been making over the last year to leave other people in this country that we don't yet know about?
So you said you've got more information. Where are you being fed this information from? Is it anyone who has a vested interest on whether Karel Schrubeck is forced to leave the country or not?
Mark Mitchell and I have been overwhelmed by the number of people who have come forward without prompting to share information about this character, and it's actually quite difficult to work through the various sources and the veracity of them. But it's not about feeding the story out. It's about the simple volume of information that's coming to us about how concerned people are that this fellow's being allowed to stay.
But you've got more to come.
Stand by.
Thank you for joining us this afternoon. That is Michael Woodhouse, former Immigration Minister, National MP, calling for Ian Lees Galloway's resignation. And what started as a small workshop to help Taranaki families manage fetal alcohol spectrum disorder has had to move venues after hundreds of people signed up. The Taranaki FASD workshop is scheduled to take place in Hawera in a couple of weeks. The original 60-place venue had to be replaced to accommodate 200 attendees, and there's still a waiting list. The event organisers told our reporter, Nita Blake-Person, the huge demand shows how desperate families are to get any support or information.
Valerie McGinn is a neuropsychologist who has worked with hundreds of children with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. She's one of the organisers of the Hawera event and says she's thrilled there are so many people interested.
We know 3 to 4% of the population have fetal alcohol, and so we know that there's literally thousands and thousands and thousands of children who need help. So the more people we can get interested doing the work, the better it's going to be.
She says more money is urgently needed to help provide support for families dealing with FASD, but with no government funding available, that's not easy. Dr McGinn is hopeful the Taranaki workshop will help create strong networks to help people manage and learn about the disorder.
Maybe an FASD support group will form amongst parents and caregivers, and just so that the Taranaki region can, start to work towards all their community finding some solutions to these problems that these children experience through no fault of their own and also through no fault of their family, because it's not that anyone's to blame. Many women drink alcohol and, become pregnant without knowing they're pregnant. And so, 80% of New Zealand women drink, so it's not as if one particular group of people are at risk for this. It's actually a widespread problem in our society.
Valerie's co-organiser, Claire Jiden of the FASD Care Action Network, says the disorder presents in different ways, which can make managing it difficult.
FASD does not always necessarily present with an intellectual disability. So without that, there's no access. An intellectual disability has to have an IQ under 70. Without that, there's no access to any kind of help, really.
And she says the authorities need to better understand the problems that children with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder face.
A lot of these kids are misunderstood. Right through their childhood and their schooling years, they end up often in trouble with the law. So our justice system is being filled by these children.
She says while the Hawera event shows more people are taking an interest in learning and managing the disorder, a lack of funding for any services to support them makes things difficult.
Ideally, as an organisation, I would like to be able to say that we could offer training and do go to the regions and do offer some training, but unfortunately, like I say, we're not funded, so we just can't do it. And, to be honest, some of the people that we've had to turn away, have come back to me saying, well, this isn't good enough, why don't you just hold another one? Well, that's great if you've got the money.
Other events in Whanganui earlier this year saw 150 people turn out, while in Tauranga there were 200 attendees. Valerie McGinn says the government needs to step up.
What we need is a commitment from government to do something about this, and that is going to take funding and targeted funding. The funding is actually, money's being wasted already, it's just not being targeted in the right place. So we're, hundreds of years behind in that regard, at least, 20 to 30 years behind Canada, for instance, where any child who's diagnosed with FASD is automatically entitled to disability services, and that's through their life as they grow up, including in adulthood. So that's what we want for our children with FASD.
The Taranaki FASD Informed Practice Workshop will take place in Hawera on November 16th. I Tāmaki Makaurau mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Nita Blake Person aho.
New Zealand's melanoma rates very rarely give cause for celebration, but there's been some good news today. Despite New Zealand having some of the highest rates of melanoma in the world, Kiwis in their 20s and 30s now have lower rates of melanoma than their parents' generation. Matthew Tunison reports.
When Lisa Rennick's stomach swelled up to the point she looked pregnant, she thought she had pancreatic cancer. When she found out she actually had melanoma, she was relieved, until she was told she only had a few weeks to live.
At some point, I was sent home in an ambulance on a Friday and they told my family I'd be dead by Monday.
5 years prior, she had a shallow melanoma cut from her back, but was told it would be fine. And she's never really been one for the sunshine, a leading cause of melanoma.
I hid from the sun. I was a nerdy little bookworm kid who didn't play any sport and spent my time inside. I did not have an outdoorsy lifestyle and I never sunbathed.
Despite the grim outlook, her husband fought to get her into a private cancer clinic and she was put onto a targeted gene therapy. 3 years later, she's cancer-free and is a picture of health as she addresses hundreds of the country's leading dermatologists and oncologists.
It never occurred to me that suddenly my abdomen swelling might be melanoma.
She told the experts there are many barriers facing melanoma patients, barriers that need to be knocked down.
I had an educated, strong person to stand up for me. But what about all the people who don't have that? How many people get lost in the system and we will never hear about them?
David Whiteman is a cancer specialist in Brisbane and had some cause for optimism for today's summit. He says rates of melanoma in this country are declining by about 1% a year, thanks to younger generations.
It is a significant finding. It gives us hope that the health promotion programs are working and that people are heeding the message to reduce their sun exposure, which is the main cause of melanoma.
Despite this positive finding, the number of fatalities from melanoma continues to rise as it affects older generations.
New Zealand still has the highest mortality rate for melanoma in the world, so it's still a serious problem.
John Kelly from the Victorian Melanoma Service in Melbourne had a stark warning about a less common but more dangerous form of melanoma, nodular melanoma. These are often ignored because they resemble pimples but are responsible for nearly half of fatalities, despite accounting for just 15% of melanomas.
Pimples will go away within a few weeks, but something that's still growing at a month, feels firm, is an important thing to draw to the attention of your doctor as soon as possible.
About 2,500 people are diagnosed with melanoma in New Zealand each year. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Matthew Tunison tēnei.
To the world of music now, and UK music, it seems, is booming. A new report from Music, the body that represents the country's live and recorded business, shows that thanks to the likes of Adele and Ed Sheeran, the UK music industry contributed a massive £4.5 billion to the economy in 2017. So what's the secret to its success? Music journalist Georgie Rogers explains.
We were just kids when we fell in love, not knowing what.
I'm really excited that British music is in this place. I think some of the most amazing music comes out of the UK. I think it's a very creatively rich place. There's a big appetite amongst fans for music. And I think in the UK we have very loyal fans. They'll buy into an artist, they'll not just get their record, they'll go to the gig, they'll buy the t-shirt, and they'll really invest their love and passion in the artist. We are providing the rest of the world with some great artists, that people are buying into music and enjoying music and getting out there and going and seeing music, and that it's making the UK money, I guess. Well, I think if you look at an artist like Dua Lipa, she's definitely an interesting one. She's a new act that has really broken through. You know, her streaming figures have been going through the roof. She's then kind of got out there. She's been doing a lot of collaborative stuff with huge, players in music, Calvin Harris, Major Lazer, so it all kind of boosted her profile, as well as winning awards and stuff. She's also kind of shown that artists can break through.
I wake up, brush my teeth, choose an outfit, big racks in my account, I get paid.
And grime is a fantastic example of how artists not only are reacting to the kind of political climate that we're living in, but also how artists are really taking ownership now.
I got the big size toes on my feet. Your face ain't big for my boots. Kick up the U. Man, know that I kick up the U.
The grime thing was quite amazing, seeing Skepta's rise and then Stormzy and all the other people in that scene, because Skepta put out that record and won the Mercury Music Prize, and it crossed over without a big label deal, and it shows that you can do that artists can take ownership of their music and do it in a way that is right for them and do it in a way that feels true to them. It's definitely all kind of spurning some really great reactionary music.
Like it's 1997, all young kings get beheaded.
Hello, it's me.
Adele is not only the highest gross, she's also the most wealthy 30 or under in the whole UK, I think. I believe I saw that news this week. Adele is just a force.
But I ain't done much healing. Hello, can you hear me?
She puts out an album and everyone wants it because obviously her voice has such an impact. But she also did do Glastonbury. She put out the record, which was incredibly successful. She did quite a lot of touring. So it's kind of the after effect, the Adele effect.
And some feedback now on our interview with Michael Woodhouse about Carol Schrubeck. This from Graham in Whangarei. Hi Checkpoint. Hi Graham. Yes, a lot of blanks from Mr Woodhouse. He says, I agree with your line of questioning. It's important to establish if the Czech man actually travelled back to the Czech Republic. Mr Woodhouse doesn't even know that. He should shut up, says Graham. Mr Woodhouse is a Member of Parliament and has a duty to reveal all he knows. And finally, if Mr Woodhouse has important information that needs to be exposed, then he needs to reveal it and stop playing cat and mouse. Linda reckons we should wrap him up in newspaper too. Thanks for joining us. That's all we have time for tonight on Checkpoint. Have a wonderful weekend.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Immigration New Zealand has confirmed that Ian Lees-Galloway is the first and only minister it alerted about the residency case of a convicted Czech drug smuggler. A scientist says that the ACT leader David Seymour's comments about killer reusable shopping bags are irresponsible. Poredua's North City shopping centre will remain closed tonight after it was evacuated this afternoon because of a fire at Kmart. The chief executive of the Taranaki Rugby Union says replacing the quake-prone Yarrow Stadium with a $250 million covered stadium would be a boost for the whole region. A leading melanoma expert has delivered a stark warning about a particularly dangerous form of the cancer. And 4 people are injured in the Bay of Plenty after 2 cars collided at the intersection of Bell Road and State Highway 2 near Nukuhau. Our next news and weather is